Good morning, class. My name is Aaron Smith, and today I will be talking about what's new in Hyper-V using Windows Server 2016. Here's a list of new features in Hyper-V. This list contains compatibility with Connected Standby, Discrete Device Assignment, Host Resource Protection, Hot Add and Remove for Network Adapters and Memory, Linux Secure Boot, Nesting Virtualization, Networking Features, Production Checkpoints, Rolling Hyper-V Cluster Upgrade, Shielded Virtual Machines, Start Order Priority for Clustered Virtual Machines, Windows Containers, and Windows PowerShell Direct. Next, I will give a brief description of each feature and their functions in Hyper-V. Connected Standby Power state is now available when the Hyper-V row is installed on a computer that uses the always on, always connected power model. The discrete device assignment feature lets you give a virtual machine direct and exclusive access to some PCIe hardware devices. Using a device in this way bypasses the Hyper-V virtualization stack, which results in faster access. The host resource protection feature helps prevent a virtual machine from using more than its share of system resources by looking for excessive levels of activity. This can help prevent a virtual machine's excessive activity from degrading the performance of the host or other virtual machines. When monitoring detects a virtual machine with excessive activity, the virtual machine is given fewer resources. The monitoring and enforcement is off by default. Users will need to use PowerShell to turn it off and on. The Hot Add and Remove for Network Adapters and Memory feature allows the user to add or remove a network adapter while the virtual machine is running, without incurring downtime. This works for Generation 2 virtual machines that run either Windows or Linux operating system. You can also adjust the amount of memory assigned to a virtual machine while it's running, even if you haven't enabled dynamic memory. This works for both Generation 1 and Generation 2 virtual machines running Windows Server 2016 or Windows 10. The Linux Secure Boot feature allows Linux operating system running on Generation 2 virtual machines to boot with the Secure Boot option enabled. Ubuntu 14.04 and later, SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 12 and later, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.0 and later, and CentOS 7.0 and later are enabled for secure boot on hosts that run Windows Server 2016. Before you boot the virtual machine for the first time, you must configure the virtual machine to use the Microsoft UEFI certificate authority. The nested virtualization feature lets you use a virtual machine as a Hyper-V host to create virtual machines within that virtualized host. This can be especially useful for development and testing environments. To use nested virtualization, you'll need at least 4 GB of RAM available for the virtualized Hyper-V host. To run at least Windows Server 2016 Technical Preview 4 or Windows 10 built 10.5.6.5 on both the physical Hyper-V host and the virtualized host. Running the same build in both the physical and virtualized environments generally improves performance. In a processor with Intel VT-X. The new networking feature includes the remote direct memory access and switch embedded teaming. That allows you to set up RDMA on network adapters bound to a Hyper-V virtual switch. Regardless of whether SET is also used, SET provides a virtual switch with some of the same compatibilities as Nick Teaming, the virtual machine multi-queues that improves the VM queue throughput by allocating multiple hardware queues per virtual machine. The default queue becomes a set of queues for a virtual machine, and traffic is spread between the queues, and the quality of service for software defined networks that allow you to manage the default class of traffic through the virtual switch within the default class bandwidth. The production checkpoints are point-in-time images of a virtual machine. This gives you a way to apply a checkpoint that complies with support policies when a virtual machine runs a production workload. Production checkpoints are based on backup technology inside the guest instead of a saved state. For Windows virtual machines, the volume snapshot service is used. For Linux virtual machines, the file system buffers the flush to create a checkpoint that's consistent with the file system. If you'd rather use checkpoints based on saved states, choose standard checkpoints instead. The rolling Hyper-V cluster upgrade feature allows users to add a node running Windows Server 2016 to a Hyper-V cluster with nodes running Windows Server 2012 R2. This allows you to upgrade the cluster without downtime. The cluster runs at a Windows Server 2012 R2 feature level until you upgrade all nodes in the cluster and update the cluster functional level with the Windows PowerShell CMD let update cluster function level. Shielded virtual machines use several features to make it harder for Hyper-V administrators and malware on the host to inspect, tamper with, or steal data from the state of a shielded virtual machine. Data in state is encrypted. Hyper-V administrators can't see the video output and disk, and the virtual machines can be restricted to run only on known healthy hosts as determined by a host guardian server. The start order priority for clustered virtual machines feature gives the user control over which clustered virtual machines are started or restarted first. This makes it easier to start virtual machines that provide services before virtual machines that use those services. Define sets place virtual machines in sets and specify dependencies. Windows Containers allows many isolated applications to run on one computer system. They're fast to build and are highly scalable and portable. Two types of containers runtime are available, each with a different degree of application isolation. Windows Server containers use namespace and process isolations. Hyper-V containers use a lightweight virtual machine for each container. Windows Container key features include support for website and applications using HTTPS. Nano servers can host both Windows Server and Hyper-V containers. The ability to manage data through container shared folders, and the ability to restrict container resources. The Windows PowerShell Direct feature gives users a way to run Windows PowerShell commands in a virtual machine from the host. Windows PowerShell Direct runs between the host and the virtual machine. This means it doesn't require networking or firewall requirements, and it works regardless of your remote management configuration. Windows PowerShell Direct is an alternative to the existing tools that Hyper-V administrators use to connect to a virtual machine on a Hyper-V host. Remote management tools such as PowerShell or Remote Desktop and Hyper-V virtual machine connection. Thank you. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time.